Hey, it's Jack Grave here, and congratulations in investing in Get and Stay Hard. I'm really excited to have you in this program, and I can't wait for you to start getting results in terms of being able to get and keep a rock solid erection. Right, so this here is the Fast Start training video, and let me briefly cover what we're going to cover in this video. And so in this video we're going to cover a brief overview of the program. So I'm going to show you, talk you through everything that you now have access to. I'm also going to share with you how to get the absolute most out of this program so you can get results as quickly as possible and with as much ease as possible. And I'm going to show you the #1 most effective way to end erectile dysfunction and get and keep rock hard erections. So you're going to get a lot out of this video. Alright, so let's start with the program overview. To start with, obviously you're watching this video here, and it's pretty much, there's not much you can do if you've already gone through some of the other stuff, but I recommend you go through this video first because this is going to provide you the overview of the program. It's going to be able to give you a kind of perspective of the best way to go about it. But if if you've already gone through some of the other material, that's absolutely fine, but ideally go through this first. Then I recommend that you go through the Get and Stay Hard training manual. Now you've got some other bonuses alongside this program, but I recommend you go through the main training first, because in the main training I cover a bunch of stuff that I might refer to in some of the other bonuses. So if you haven't already gone through Get and Stay Hard, some of that stuff's not going to make sense. So best thing to do is just go through it, go through the main guide first, and then look at the bonuses afterwards. And the other two bonuses happen to be the Squirting Orgasms Report, in which you're going to learn the specific techniques to give women squirting orgasms. They're incredibly pleasurable and they're incredibly fun, so I think you're really going to enjoy what you learn in there. And the other bonus you're going to get is called Stealth Stamina Strategies, and in this guide I walk you through some techniques you can use to last longer in bed. And as a result of that, if you can last longer in bed, you can outlast your partner, and not only make sure that you give her one orgasm, because the truth is that most guys don't last long enough to bring their woman to orgasm. And then what's really great is you can learn to last so long that you can give your lover multiple orgasms every time you have sex. So orgasms, not only multiple orgasms at the same time, but orgasms more than once in the same sex session, which is really, really cool. Alright, so anyway, back to this video. Let's talk about how you can get the absolute most out of this entire program. And what you've really got to know is that there are two approaches to this and to any program, to be honest. There's the evaluation approach and there's the resource approach. And from the thousands of people I've helped, the most successful have always been those who use the resource approach. And let me explain exactly what I mean by that. The evaluation approach is the approach of sitting back, crossing your arms, and reading as if you're, as if you're a teacher marking a school kid's essay or assignment, and you read through and you're checking for spelling mistakes, and you're evaluating how he's describing concepts, or how she's describing concepts, and that's good, that's appropriate for that type of situation. However, the reason you invested in this program is to get the result of being able to get and maintain rock hard erections. And the evaluation approach to achieve that outcome just doesn't work. And so the people that have gone through my programs and I've seen become most successful are the ones that look at what I put in front of them as a resource to help them get the results they want. So yes, I'm being honest here. I might make a mistake, or a spelling mistake or two. I'll probably and R in this program because I'm not a professional speaker or professional journalist. I'm just someone that's had some incredible results. I've helped some other people get some incredible results, and I'm sharing with you the process I've used. So look at what I put in front of you as a resource, as tools to get the result that you really want, and don't worry too much about evaluating, because that's not what you came here for. If you want to read, if you want to be entertained, then you can buy a really good novel, and I do hope I entertain you, but my outcome is more than just entertainment. My outcome for you is to get you the result, and so therefore the best way to help you get the result is for you to look at all this material as resources rather than just something you can sit back and evaluate. So I just thought I'd let you know, because I've had the opportunity to help a lot of guys now, and I know the difference between those that get results and those that don't. And so the way to look at this is basically to set aside any skepticism you have and just give it a try. You've got You know, what I say is basically look at it like for the next 30 days, put your skepticism to the side, and you know you've got every right to come back to that, but just for the next 30 days, just put that all aside, give it a go, and I think you'll thank yourself for doing that. And then also become outcome focused, which you've just talked about. So get focused on the outcome you want, and don't worry about all the things that are going to hold you back, or any setbacks that you have, or you know, issues with time, or you're not finding the time to get through not finding the time to, you know, perhaps do the exercises. Don't worry about the stuff that's in your way. Worry about getting the outcome. If when you become focused on the outcome, you'll find a way to make time for the exercises, or to go through the training, or to do what's necessary to get you the result. And finally, let me just remind you to not fall into the trap of thinking you know this stuff, because what I'm going to share here really works. What I've got to share helps guys get and keep rock hard erections. It helps guys go from, you know, being not able to get rock hard erections, being flaccid or having semi-erect erections, or losing their erections during sex, to being able to keep and maintain hard throughout sex. And so if you really knew the stuff I was going to share with you, then you wouldn't have any erection problems. And so the reason I'm saying that is because I don't want you to, you know, there is a small chance you might come across a concept that you've seen before. And if you do that, the worst mistake you can make is think, oh, I know this stuff. Because the fact is, I'm going to be explaining it in a very unique way, and I'll probably be giving you distinctions or new ways of looking at things that will finally help you get the result. But only if you're open to seeing the potential, and not if you close down and start thinking, I've already seen this, or if you completely skip over what I have to share with you. Alright, so now you know how to get the most out of this program. Now let's get on to the real meat and content of this training video, which is the #1 erectile dysfunction cure. And the #1 cure that I'd like to share with you right now in this video is creating and using your own erection switch. And I covered this a little bit in the material that you've probably seen before joining this training, but let me explore it in detail, and let me tell you exactly how to create and how to use it. And what's really awesome about an erection switch is that an erection switch is literally the ability, the power to turn on an erection in any situation. And I've created a 5-step formula for creating and using erection switches. Now in the guide I've covered it in full, because it is quite literally a step-by-step formula, and it involves exercises and stuff you have to do. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a verbal overview to help you get the distinctions, and perhaps me talking through the 5-step process will help you get a perspective that you might not have achieved by just reading through the guide. So I think this will really help you, and also it will act as a bit of a reminder. It's a little bit different from having to read through a guide, so hopefully this will add another perspective and will help you to get your result. Right, so let's start talking through the different steps. So step #1 is to identify and interrupt your current sexual state. And as you'll learn in the Get and Stay Hard training guide, one of the causes of erectile dysfunction is nervousness and fear. And you see, whether we're conscious of it or not, pretty much every guy that suffers from erectile dysfunction, or basically the inability to get as hard or stay as hard as they want, on some level they experience some kind of nervousness and fear. Now some guys don't like to admit it to themselves, whereas you get other guys that are, you know, very viscerally experience the fear and anxiety around sex. But regardless of kind of your willingness to accept it, I guess, the fact is that if you're experiencing ED, there's a very high probability that you're experiencing some kind of anxiety around sex. And what happens is, whenever you experience any kind of fear, and of course fear is an emotion, so don't forget that fear all fear is an emotion. And so what happens is, whenever you experience fear, or some of the other names that people have for it, so like nervousness, anxiety, performance anxiety, all that kind of stuff, when you experience these emotions, when you experience the fear or the emotion of fear, what happens is it triggers what's called the fight or flight response and the release of adrenaline. And what happens is, when this response reacts and when adrenaline gets released into your bloodstream, it actually weakens your erection. And again, I cover this in Get and Stay Hard, but the reason for this is because back in the caveman days, which we still possess a lot of the instinctive a lot of the instinctive parts of ourselves are based on how we had to act back in the caveman days, because we've only very recently evolved when you actually look at the lifespan of a species. But anyway, without getting into that kind of stuff, what fight or flight really means is, what used to happen is, say back in the caveman days, we were going about our business, we were either just hanging out or whatever kind of stuff us cavemen did back then, and then suddenly a tiger comes along and we see the tiger, and instantly fear hits us, because we're scared of the tiger, we feel the emotion of fear, and the purpose of that emotion is to then give us a fight or flight response. And what this means is, to fight means to get ready to fight, or flight means to get ready to run. And what this response does is it takes all the blood away from non-time sensitive organs, so things like your digestive system or your reproductive organs, and it channels them to things like your legs, so that you can, say, run away from trouble or fight if you have to fight. And so, as you can imagine, a response like this is not great for erections, because say you're fully erect, but then suddenly a tiger comes along, or a lion, and you have to run away, then all that, the blood's going to get taken away from there, so that you can then run away and save your life, because your life is much more time sensitive than one reproductive instance. And so the thing is, this was really valuable to us in the past, but the problem is, for different situations, different situations produce the same emotion of fear, which then triggers the same ultimate response. But sometimes this doesn't produce the ideal outcome, because if you experience fear, then if you fear, for example, not performing well in the bedroom, then that's going to cause you to lose your erection, which means you're not going to be able to perform in the bedroom. And so us humans create these strange problems inside of our head based on a bunch of these different factors to do with our natural inbuilt instincts and various other things. And so anyway, what this 5-step process does is it helps you kind of realign these instincts to then get you moving in a direction so that you can keep and get and stay hard, and ultimately deliver pleasure to your partner. And so the first step is to identify the emotions so that we can interrupt them. So like I was saying, you probably on some level experience fear during sex at the moment, and so what we want to do is we want to identify these emotions so that we can then interrupt them, and then we can start looking at replacing them with more empowering emotions. So the first step is to identify these emotions, and the way to do that is to realize that all emotions are made up of what we do, say, and see. And so let me give you an example to explain this concept, because it's really important. Imagine there are two people in front of you, and physically they look the same. So one person they're both the same height, they're the same build, they've got the same hair, they look the same, except one person is feeling incredibly confident, and one person is feeling incredibly shy or depressed. Now, just by describing the emotional states of those two people, can you see how they're visibly different? They physically look the same, but if they're really experiencing the emotions of confidence versus depression to a high intensity, you could probably see visibly the difference between the two people, right? So if you look at the confident person, if I ask most people this, they'll say the confident person has his chest out. Let's assume it's a guy. Confident person has his chest out, he's looking up, he's got strong eye contact, he's got a sense of purpose. Then if you look at the shy person, they're probably going to be more closed up, they're going to be breathing more shallow, probably looking at the ground, and not moving with a lot of conviction. And this is just one of 3 different aspects. What a person does is one of 3 different aspects that make up an emotion. And as I'll cover in a second, there's also there's what you do, there's what you say to yourself, and there's what you see inside your own head. And the combination of those 3 things determine the emotion you experience at any single point in time. And so, like I've written here, all emotional states have their own unique characteristics, and that's how you can tell two people that look exactly the same physically. That's how you can tell if one person's confident and one person's depressed, because each emotional state have their own physical characteristics and internal characteristics in order for that emotion to be expressed. And so the other 2 things are what you say to yourself and what you see within your own head. And so again, coming back to the example of a confident person versus a shy person, A confident person, most people will say, a confident person will say to themselves things like, yes, I can do this, I can't wait, I'm really excited, I love this, all that kind of stuff. And then a depressed or shy person will say things like, I don't know, I'm not sure, I don't think I want to do this, and all the kind of negative stuff. And they'll also say it in a lower tone with less conviction, less confidence, whereas a really confident person will say it loud, clear, probably with pauses to emphasize certain points. And then finally you have C, which is what a person sees inside of their head, which is the third factor that makes up an emotion. And what you see is a confident person will typically see things like, they'll see the result they want, they'll see all the benefits, and they'll see them brightly in color and very close to them, perhaps moving, very vivid. And then if you ask, if you were to guess, or if you ask anyone what a shy person or a depressed person would see, they see things like not working out for them. Typically they see it very grey or dull or very blurry, or they might not have a clear vision of anything. And so that's how what this all means is that in order for an emotional state to be experienced, there are factors of what you do, what you say to yourself, and what you see, and that's what creates an emotional state. And so what we want to do is we want to identify what you're doing, saying to yourself, and seeing during sex, because when we do that, we can then identify your emotional state. Because sometimes it's hard to put a specific word to describe a certain emotional state, whereas when you go back and ask yourself during sex, most of the time, what do I do physically, how do I carry myself, what's my breathing like, what do I say to myself, what are the specific words I use. And you might have to dig deep. Initially you might say, I can't think of anything that I say during sex. But then if you dig a little deeper, if you ask questions like, well, what if you could think of what you say to yourself during sex, then eventually this stuff will start coming. And the same is true for what you see. We all visualize stuff. Most of the time we're just not conscious of it. And so when it comes to what you see, this is an important point. You don't need to be a master at visualizing. Some people think they can't visualize, but the fact is we're all visualizing all the time. Whenever you close your eyes and see something, you're visualizing. So don't get hung up on the word visualizing. Right, so there's an exercise for this process of identifying exactly what you do, say, and see during sex, and there's a full exercise in the guide. It's got all the steps to go through, all the questions to ask, and the best way to do this is when you go through the guide, you get a pen and pad, or you can open up a program on your computer or whatever, and you just write down your answers. And it's really important that you write them down, because if you don't write them down, then you're just not going to get the breakthroughs, because you're not going to be specific, you're not going to understand and see what's really going on. And so let me just give you a quick overview of the process. Like I said, the whole thing is in the guide, but just to give you a quick overview of how the process works, so that when you come to doing it in the guide, you know what's going on. Right, so the first step is to take yourself back to that moment. It's not enough to just think, okay, so when I'm in a sexual situation, this is what I think. You've really got to take yourself back to that moment, and you've really got to feel it, you've really got to go there, and you've really got to be in that moment. And it's really important that you do that, because only when you're in that moment will you be able to accurately identify these various factors. And so that once you're back in the moment, you want to identify, and like I said, you want to write down what you do, say, and see. And you want to get as specific as possible. You want to cover everything, because you're going to get some really interesting breakthroughs. Because when you analyze what you've written, and what's really interesting, when you do analyze what you've written, sometimes just reading through, like the things you say to yourself, or the things you picture in your head, or what you're doing with your body, when you analyze those things, sometimes you'll say to yourself, I can't believe I'm saying those things, that sounds ridiculous. Or, why am I picturing something not working when I could be picturing something that is working? But it's not until you actually write these things down that they become clear to you. But anyway, once you write them down, what's really great is that it'll just becoming aware of these things can sometimes be enough to interrupt your pattern and stop you running negative limiting patterns that could be causing you to experience an emotional fear that then limits your ability to get an erection. Alright, so the second step is to now identify your instinctive erection switches. And how this works is you use the same process, but instead of identifying what you normally experience during sex, I want you to identify what it takes for you to feel super aroused and rock hard. Because here's the deal. there's going to be a point in time at which, you know, in the last 3 months or last year or perhaps the last, you know, however, whatever time period, if you think back, there'll be a time when you naturally got really, really hard, you got super aroused and you were rock hard. There's going to be a time like that. And what we're going to discover is what happened at that point in time in order to make that happen for you. We're not just going to assume it happened by accident. We know that that has been created for a reason, and there are certain things that you did in your head with your physical body and that you pictured in order for that outcome, your rock hard erection, to happen. So let's give a quick overview again of how the process works. It's pretty straightforward because it's virtually the same as what I just covered. What you need to do is, number one, take yourself back to a moment of intense arousal. So like I said, take yourself back to a time when you were incredibly aroused, you were really, really hard, and really get into that moment. Then identify and write down what you did, what you said, and what you saw at this point in time, and get really specific, cover everything. And now what you have is a recipe for getting an erection, because if you can recreate all these factors at any point in the future, then you have the power to recreate an erection as well, because the erection is an end result. An erection is caused by your brain telling your body to get hard, and so therefore if you can control what's going on in your brain and your body physically, then you can control the message that's going to your penis to get hard. And that's what we're going to do, and we're actually going to take that to another level in the next step. And the way we're going to do that, step number 3, is to create a powerful erection switch. And what this step involves is literally creating a switch which, when you flip, will take you into that emotional state where you are super aroused, and as a result you get really, really hard very quickly. And so this whole process comes down to a concept of anchoring, which is a term that I've borrowed from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And anchoring is when a specific stimulus results in a specific emotional response. And I give the example in Get and Stay Hard of when you travel back perhaps to a place that you haven't been to in a long time, so perhaps like a place that you used to spend a lot of time as a child, so perhaps your old school or an old family home. If you travel back there, when you travel into that new environment, suddenly loads of emotions will come flooding back to you. And what that situation is that place that you traveled back to is an emotional anchor. That place that you traveled back to is a stimulus that then triggers a certain emotional response. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something similar. We're going to create a stimulus, except this is one that you can control very easily. And whenever you implement the stimulus, or whenever you flip the switch, then it's going to bring back the emotional state that we've just talked about, which is the one that instinctively gives you a rock hard erection. Now, the success in doing this, in creating a powerful switch, comes down to 3 factors. Okay, it comes down to, number 1, picking a unique and repeatable stimulus. And so what I mean by that is it has to be something that is not going to happen accidentally or easily, or is something that's just going to get triggered as you're doing it. So for example, as you go about your everyday life. So for example, you wouldn't want your stimulus to be a handshake, because every time someone shakes your hand, you're going to be in different environments, and it's going to weaken your anchor, and also it'd probably be quite inappropriate if you were to choose that as your erection switch. So you want to pick something that's unique and repeatable, and what I recommend inside the program is to just touch the tip of your index finger to the tip of your thumb, and it's a very unique experience to do this, because that's something that very rarely happens just by itself, by accident, and that's what makes it great, and it's easily repeatable as well. Then, in order to also successfully install an erection switch, you need to do so with emotional intensity. So like I kind of mentioned earlier, it's not enough to just read through the list of factors that you experience when you're in a peak arousal state. It's not enough to just read through them. You have to really, really experience it, and you have to experience it with intensity, because it's only at the point of emotional intensity that we can link up your erection switch to the emotion. Otherwise, you're not really linking up anything successfully. So that's really important. And also, there's got to be some consistency, and so that means you've got to do it more than once. if you're lucky, you can do it once and be done, but for most people, repeating it over and over again significantly increases the power and effectiveness. So how does the actual process work? Well, what we're going to do is you're going to use the recipe that you identified in step number 2 to take yourself back into a peak arousal state with full hardness. So you're going to be fully erect as well, because we want you in that peak emotional state. We want you in the emotional state that you'd like to create in the future. And then you're going to increase the intensity by magnifying the emotion factors. So you're going to look at things like how you any key physical characteristics, how can you enhance them. You're going to look at what words were you saying to yourself and how are you saying them, and how can you enhance that. So can you say it louder, can you say it more clearly, can you add more impact to the words you're using. And then also look at what you're seeing. So perhaps if you were visualizing a certain image or you were appreciating a certain aspect of a woman, how can you magnify that? How can you make it clearer, brighter, louder, whatever you can do to magnify the emotional factors. And then you're going to do all those things to bring yourself to an absolute peak emotion of arousal. And then at that very peak, you're going to link the unique anchor or erection switch to that emotional state. So say your erection switch is going to be touching your index finger to the tip of your thumb. Then at the very peak of the emotion, you're going to fire off that anchor or the erection switch at the same time being at the peak emotion, and doing so is going to link up how you feel to that particular trigger so that you can then in future recreate it. Step number 4 is to now reinforce your switch. And in order to do this, what I recommend you do is you practice installing your switch every day for 7 days. And the reason I say that is because, like I've been talking about, it's all about consistency. Doing it once is very rarely enough to make it such a powerful trigger that just by activating the trigger or your switch, you could instantly get hard. And so what I recommend you do is you do it every day for 7 days, and the speed of your success will come down to all the 3 success factors that I've been talking about. It's going to require a unique and repeatable stimulus, it's going to require emotional intensity, and it's going to require consistently in terms of you doing it every day for 7 days. And also what will really maximize your chances of success is to every day focus on improving the intensity of the arousal state that you achieve while linking up your anchor. Because as you do this, every time you do it, you'll find that there's a new level of intensity that you can reach. Kind of like working out a muscle, exercising a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you can do, and every time you'll be able to reach a higher level of intensity. And with the new levels of intensity that you reach, you'll then be able to install an even more powerful erection switch. Now, what you can also do to help reinforce your erection switch is to practice something called mental rehearsal. And this was first popularized by Dr. Maxwell Maltz quite a while back actually. And what he did was he basically discovered that by visualizing you doing something successfully, it makes you significantly more likely to go ahead and be successful at it in the real world. And he did all sorts of kind of interesting studies, and I talk a little bit in more detail about this in Get and Stay Hard. But the real lesson here is that to really improve the effectiveness of your switch, it really helps if you take some time to visualize the installation of your switch working correctly, and also if you visualize when it actually comes to sexual situations, you being able to respond in the way you want to respond rather than in the way that you've currently been responding. And this is what my final point here is really all about. See the success of implementing your erection switch. Mental rehearsal is so powerful. If you ask anyone that's successful, almost without doubt, they'll have seen the result they wanted before having made it. And so that's what you've got to do if you really want to get the absolute most out of this, and if you want to get the fastest possible result. Then finally, step number 5 is to test and calibrate the switch. After 7 days, and make sure you do not do this before, after 7 days, test out your switch. In other words, perform your anchor, that is your trigger in order to become aroused and to become hard. But this time, after the 7 days of training, perform it without previously putting yourself into that emotional state, and see what happens. If you get fully hard, then congratulations, the process has worked, and you can now take this to the bedroom, and you won't believe how much of a change, how much your life will change, given the fact that you can now get completely hard on your command, which is amazing. So if that's the case, then just celebrate, because you've done a fantastic job. Now if you get semi-hard, then congratulations, because this is an interesting situation, because although you haven't got your ideal result, which is to get rock hard, what you have done is you've just proven that the process is working. You've proven that you can create an erection switch which, when triggered, actually increases your arousal and creates some level of erection. All you need to do is you need to go and now improve the strength of your switch. Now, if nothing happens when you go to trigger your switch, then you really need to go back to the drawing board, and specifically you need to go back and address the 3 success factors that I've now mentioned multiple times. You need to make sure that you're using a unique and repeatable stimulus, so you need to make sure that your switch isn't being accidentally fired off during the week and therefore weakening it. You also need to make sure that you're doing it with enough emotional intensity. You have to really get into the moment when you're fully aroused and have a full erection. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to create an effective switch. And then finally, you have to do it consistently. If you haven't been doing it every day for 7 days, then you need to go back and you need to do it, because this is such a we're literally rewiring your brain here. So these things do take time, they take commitment and a little bit of discipline, but really 7 days, there's not too much discipline to ask for, and I think it's a very small investment for, in return, being able to absolutely transform your sex life. And my other point of this is that now is the time to make these changes. Okay, you can put these off, or think that you're just going to keep trying to do what you're doing, but the fact is now is the time to make the change. If things haven't worked for you, then just go back to the drawing board now and get started again, because every day that you delay it is every day that you're going to have to keep living with your current situation instead of your new ideal situation. Oh, and also as an important point, if your erection switch is anything less than 100% successful in terms of making you fully hard, then don't continue to use your switch except when you're trying to link it up and create it in your peak arousal state, because otherwise you're just going to weaken it. Right, so that's it for the Fast Start training video. I've given you the 5-step formula. I've given you a really solid overview of it, so that now when you read it through in the guide, you're going to get the absolute best possible results with it. And the guide will offer you a lot more detail on the specific exercises. So here I've kind of given you a verbal overview. I've covered a lot of the stuff involved in the 5-step formula, but the guide covers it in a lot more detail, and also it really gives you the specifics so that you can walk through it step by step, have a pen and pad ready, and make sure that you cover every single thing necessary to really perform it to your maximum possible ability. And let me kind of wrap up by saying this 5-step process can have you experiencing the hardest erections and best sex of your life. It might feel a little bit like there's a little bit of work ahead, and that is true, there is a little bit of work ahead, but it's so worth it, because if you go through this process, you will have the power to experience the hardest erections of your life and the best sex of your life. And so those two things are so incredible, so amazing, that it makes it worth it. It makes it worth taking the time to read the guide, putting in the work, because the results are so worthwhile. And so finally, to wrap up, this is kind of common sense. It almost doesn't really need saying, but the success of this program and you getting results all depends on you actually doing it. It's one thing to read it through, which is great, but the next step is to go ahead and actually do it. And when it comes to actually doing it, in the Get and Stay Hard guide, I've written out the 7 keys to making sure you follow through, because it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day life, or to kind of be excited about it for a few days and then fall off and almost forget about it. It's really important that you don't do that. So in the guide, I've written the 7 keys to making sure that you follow through and you enjoy following through. Also, be sure to explore some of the psychological and physical blocks that may also be stopping erections for you. It could be that you go through the 5-step process, and if you're having any kind of issue, it could be that maybe you've got some kind of psychological or physical block that's holding you back from having a strong erection. And so in the guide, I also cover some of the various things to address in this specific area in order to help you with that. Right, and now go ahead and dive into the guide. Right, you've had the chance to talk with me here in this fast start, to work with me here in this fast start training video. Now it's time to go and dive into the guide, start soaking up the content and start performing the exercises so that you can start and go get some really cool results.